Hello and welcome to another review of Junji Ito Maniac, Japanese Tales of the Macabre, Episode 7. And Episode 7 only has one story, and that is Tombtown, or as the original manga story is called, Gravetown. And this one is actually pretty dang faithful to the manga. There's only like a little bit of a change near the end, which I will go into when we get there. But other than that, pretty faithful, and I absolutely love this story. I enjoyed both the actual manga story as well as the adaptation for it. I think they did a really good job. So the story itself, we have Tsuyoshi and Kaoru. They are siblings, and they are on their way to meet their friend, or Kairu's friend, Izumi. Izumi has moved away, and so Kaoru is going to visit her for the first time. Her brother wants to tag along because he's like always had a crush on Izumi and he wants to see her again. And he's the only one who's able to drive. Like he's the only one that has a license. So they're driving on their way to meet Izumi when they get into a car accident. They end up running over this little girl that runs in the middle of the road. And she's busted up. Her face is all swollen up. And they bring her into the car and they're going to try to drive her to the hospital. But she ends up dying. And of course, Tsuyoshi freaks out. He doesn't know what to do. He ends up stashing the body in the trunk of the car. And his plan is that we will go see Izumi, and then afterwards we'll go bury the body somewhere in the mountains where no one will ever find it. And this basically becomes like a situation where the two of them are haunted by this death, but they can't tell anyone about it because they'll get in trouble. So they arrive at the town and almost run into a gravestone that's in the middle of the street. And they're a little bit confused about why someone would put a gravestone in the middle of the street. But they drive around it, and then they find their way blocked by a bunch of gravestones, just littering the road. There's no way for them to drive past it. So they reverse to try to see if they can find another way to get to Izumi's house, when they end up knocking over the first gravestone that they saw. And then some of the villagers come out and notice and basically say, hey, like, get your jack so we can lift up your car and we can get the gravestone marker out and we can help you set it back. And we have this tense moment where Tsuyoshi is kind of hesitant to open up the trunk of his car where the jack is, because that's where he stuffed the body of the dead girl. But eventually he's able to get it open and grab the jack without anyone seeing the dead body. And they're helping him get the marker out from under his car and setting it up. And they basically kind of explain that the gravestone is here because that's where the person who the gravestone belongs to died. At first it started off as one gravestone, but then more people died in the middle of the road, so more grave markers were put up. And if you want to, find your way around, there's like the back streets that you can take. There's hardly any gravestones there. And eventually they meet up with Izumi. And Izumi is talking about the gravestones because they mention it because they find it weird. And Izumi explains that the gravestones are put at a place where a person breathed their last breath. So once a person dies, the final breath they take, that's where a gravestone marker goes up. And she even explains that there's one inside her house. And she opens up this room and there's a grave marker there. And she explains that that was the grave marker that belonged to the previous owner who died in this exact spot. And it's kind of like weirded her out at first, but she's gotten used to it. She's taking them for a walk around the village, and they just see random gravestones everywhere, including one in the passenger seat of this abandoned car. And they pass by a hospital where they see doctors and nurses rushing out an old man. They're like, hurry, hurry, he's about to die. And they place him down outside, and he dies. And they're like, oh, we got him out just in time. And Tsuyoshi asks, like, why did they drag him out here? And she's like, well, because they didn't want to put a gravestone inside the hospital, so they had to drag him out here. And there's a bunch of other gravestones outside the hospital. And along the way, they find a dead cat. And Tsuyoshi rushes over. He's going to grab the cat and give it a proper burial when Izumi freaks out and yells at him not to touch it. And she says, just leave it alone, and a gravestone will eventually show up for it. That's when he realizes that, all the like different sized grave markers that we've seen along the way is for like people as well as animals and stuff. Still, it's just really weird that we're putting up gravestones where people died. like immediately at the exact spot that they died, rather than taking them to like a cemetery or something. They go back to the house, and Azumi realizes that her little sister Ayumi isn't around, and she hasn't shown up yet. And they start waiting for a little while, and then nightfall comes, and Ayumi still hasn't shown up, and they're kind of worried like where she could have gone. And that's when Kaoru starts freaking out, and Tsuyoshi notices this. He drags Kaoru into an empty room, and he starts questioning her, like, what did a Ayumi look like? And Kaoru basically describes the little girl that they ran over and stuffed in the trunk of their car. The reason why Kaoru didn't realize it was Ayumi at first was because her face was swollen, but now that she thinks about it, that was Ayumi. So not only did they run over and kill an innocent little girl, but it was Izumi's younger sister. But they can't tell anyone about it because then they'll get in trouble. So they keep it to themselves. And the parents become worried, so they call on all the villagers to go search the mountains to see if they can find her. Maybe she got lost in the woods. And so they spend all night trying to search for her. No luck. Eventually they're like, well, maybe she fell in the well. And so they go to this old well, and Tsuyoshi is kind of wondering, like, what's this well about? And they explain that no one knows who put up this well, like how it came to be. It's just always been here. It's very deep. No one has ever seen the bottom. Whenever someone died and their body was disturbed, or like a gravestone wasn't made for them, their body would be dumped in this well to try to help them move on to the afterlife. And of course, Yoshi's like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, what does that mean? And they explain to him, well, why don't you go back to the hospital and see the old man that you saw dying the previous day? So Tsuyoshi and Kaoru go to the hospital, where they see the body of the old man, and the body of the old man is morphing into the grave marker. And it's revealed that the reason why gravestones happen where people died is because they're the gravestones. Their body eventually turns into a grave marker. Tsuyoshi goes to touch it, and like everyone around him freaks out and tells him not to touch it. If you touch the body before it finishes turning into a gravestone, you will disrupt its process. The spirit will not be at peace. So that's why Izumi freaked out about touching the cat. Like, whenever someone dies, you can't touch them once they've breathed their last breath. And you can't touch them until they fully turn into a grave marker. But yeah, they start basically realizing that, oh no, not only did we run over Ayumi, but we disturbed her body. We didn't leave her body at the scene of the crime, and we touched her to carry her into the car as well as into the trunk. So we've probably disturbed her grave marker. On their way back to Izumi's house, they see Izumi staring into the back seat of the car. They ask, like, is there something wrong with the car? She's like, oh no, I was just looking. I gotta run. There's some errands I still gotta do. And she pedals away on her bike. And Kaoru looks into the back seat of the car, and she realizes that there's blood drops left from the body of Ayumi. So they have a feeling that Izumi might know that they were involved in running over her sister. So they decide, all right, we're going to leave tonight. So they come up with an excuse, like, we don't want to bother you, like, during this hard time, so we're just going to leave. And, yeah, they drive away. And as they drive away, the family watches them leave. And they decide to drive to the old well and dispose of the body inside the well. And so they get up to the well. The car is, like, struggling to get up there. Something's wrong with the car. Like, he really has to step on the gas just to get the car moving. And he discovers why when he opens up the trunk, and he sees the dead body of Ayumi has been morphed into what looks like a bunch of weird diamonds and gore and stuff. Basically, the being made into the grave marker got disrupted, so it's not a grave marker. Instead, it's like this horrifying, just heavy rock-like object. And so they carry up the body towards the well, dump it. As they're dumping the body, Ayumi's bracelet falls out and it lands on the floor. And they dump the body in the well. And during the process, Tsuyoshi ends up cutting his hand on one of the jagged parts of Ayumi's body. And then that's when he hears the sound that sounds like rocks scraping against concrete. And he hears this weird sound. And then Ayumi's body pulls itself out of the well. and it grows into this giant, almost like centipede looking diamond grotesque creature, and it yells out for its sister, and it says, he's the one that killed me. Tsuyoshi ran me over and hid my body. And Tsuyoshi starts freaking out, and that's when Kaoru's like, what's wrong with you? And he realizes that this was all in his head. The well is completely normal. There's no creature coming out of it. And so they drive back home, and we see Izumi showing up at the old well, and she discovers the bracelet of her sister. So she kind of puts the pieces together of what happened. Meanwhile, Tsuyoshi is getting sick. He starts having like these real weird diamond things growing out of his hand. And then eventually he ends up turning into this grotesque rock creature, just like Ayumi did. And his sister sees this and she starts freaking out. And then we cut back to the village where we see 3 gravestones in Izumi's house with a suicide letter and sleeping pills. So basically the family killed themselves in their grief. And that's how it ends. Like I said, it was pretty faithful, minus a few things. One, there's no bracelet that the sister wore that Izumi finds. But you can kind of tell that she kind of puts pieces together when she sees the bloodstains in the back of the car. 2, Tsuyoshi does not turn into this weird diamond rock looking creature. And, Kaoru witnesses this. Instead, what happens is he develops a fever. He ends up dying. During the funeral, the parents ask to see him one last time. And as they open up his casket, that's when they discover that he's become this weird, grotesque, rock-looking creature. And he becomes bigger and bigger, and he breaks through his casket. But he's already dead at this point. He doesn't turn into one as he's alive. Instead, he dies from an illness caused by the scratch, and then he becomes this creature. And then Kaoru, out of guilt, goes back to the village, I guess maybe to confess what happened to Izumi. But when she shows up, she sees the 3 gravestones and realizes that the family have killed themselves out of grief. So that's the difference. So it's not completely different from what's in the manga, just a little bit. I do kind of prefer the manga version more, but it's not like it was like the previous episode where they just completely changed the ending. So all in all, I enjoyed this. I like the fact that this entire episode was just the one story. So we really got to focus on these characters, and we got to take our time with the story and things like that. This is what the series should be in general. Just every episode should be one story, so we can really focus on the characters and the plot and the pacing, and not have to cut things out so we can squeeze in another story. I also like the fact that it remained pretty faithful to what's in the original story. Yeah, the ending changes a little bit, but it's still basically the same. It's just how we get there is a little bit different. Voice acting was good. Animation was good for the most part. The part at the well is a little bit off, especially when the Yumi's weird diamond grave grotesque body comes out of the well. You can really tell that was CGI with cell shading. It's just really obvious. It kind of stands out when compared to the rest of the animation in the story. But overall, I enjoyed it. I thought this was one of the better episodes. I still think Hanging Balloons is the best one, but this is high up there. It was awesome. I loved it. So yeah, while the previous episode was kind of bad and I didn't care for it, this one more than redeemed itself. If only most of the series was like this. But yeah, I enjoyed this one a lot. This one was really good. Highly recommend watching this one. So there you go. There's Toontown. Hope you enjoyed. Hope to see you next time. Take care. Later.